I'd like to invite everyone here, first of all, to consider the land on which you are sitting or standing today. You might silently name the land where you are. I'm here on the land of the Yalukit Willam people of the Kulin Nation, and I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians across all the lands that we stand on today, both past, present, and emerging. I acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution that they make to the lives of our regions and our nation. And I extend this respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person who may be present here today. Today's conversation offers an insight into the important aspect of ACRATH's work, and that of advocacy, where there have been some significant achievements. Our two guests are our Executive Officer, Christine Carolan, and National Committee Member, Peter O'Neill. I ask you to note that this is not a Q&A session and that all of us will be muted. If you have any questions, however, please type them into the chat function on your Zoom screen and they will be followed up, but at a later date. I now invite Cindy Bowen, ACRATH's Development Officer, to lead today's conversation. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. This is very exciting, and what a privilege I have to host a conversation. It'll be hard for me because I do like to talk a lot, so this will be really interesting that I just have to ask one question and let two others talk. So thank you, everyone. Peter, I suppose my first question is to you. Before your time at ACRATH, you spent years in Taiwan. Can you tell us about your experience there with exploited workers?
Thanks, Cindy. Yes, I worked in Taiwan for 26 years, and during my time there, I helped to found the local diocese migrant centre for trafficked peoples and migrants who are abused in their workplace, and also directed two of the migrant centres in the diocese where I worked 1 hour south of Taipei. So during my time there, I saw a lot of labour exploitation among the migrant workers coming from Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, and the Philippines. And then in the early to mid 2000s, I realized that it was not just labour exploitation and theft of wages, but also human trafficking. So through the network partners that the Catholic Church was involved in, both civil society and faith-based organisations, we worked together with the local government to implement the Human Trafficking Prevention Act of Taiwan. And that advocacy and lobbying work took about 4 to 5 years in having regular meetings with government. So it was a great success to have the Act implemented after 4 to 5 years of hard lobbying and advocacy. And then we had to make sure that the new law was implemented.
Thank you. Thank you. That experience, I see it in so many aspects of your advocacy work and your connection with the workers and the people. Christine, a key element of our work, as Marguerite suggested, is advocacy. I guess, what is advocacy?
Well, it can be a whole lot of things, Cindy, but I think for the purpose of this conversation today, we're really talking about how ACRATH works to bring challenges to members of Parliament.
Yep.
And to decision makers, so departmental officers as well. Yeah.
And so with that in mind, can you recall one of the first moments that prompted your actions and ACRATH's actions to really focus on advocacy, to make the world a fairer place for individuals?
Sure. I think it's got an interesting backstory. We actually went the first time to Parliament House in 2006. And the reason we went is the backstory.
Okay.
And it's a tough backstory, actually, because two young Thai women who were here in Australia and were trafficked into sexual exploitation were actually back then in immigration detention and died in quite separate incidents. And a little NGO network got together and said, the coronial inquiry is about how they died, like the mechanics of their death. And we joined in and said, well, actually, no, the question to be asking is, like, why were they here? And what were the circumstances that meant that they were actually in an immigration detention facility rather than under somebody's care? And so Louise Cleary is here today. She was our founder, our ACRATH founder, and our current president, and once a former president as well. Hi, Louise. And Jennifer Byrne, who's the professor from Sydney. They got together and with a number of other really inspired and inspiring women and said, let's put to the United Nations these stories and let's see if we can get some leverage. And we did. The UN gave us reinforcement of what we were asking of them, and we took that to Canberra in 2006.
That's when we were researching and preparing for this conversation, we had a mantra, we're in it for the long haul.
Yeah.
And I guess that's a classic example of the long haul. And and everyone, while you're here, the next couple of questions, I suppose, are ones that I'm going to ask Peter and Christine just to share aspects of the long haul of advocacy.
Mm.
So Peter, now back in Australia, seasonal workers from the Pacific, Timor-Leste and Southeast Asia come to Australia in 2 federal government schemes. Now, you're very involved in them, especially before COVID, and I know you're very in touch with communities who have these people in our community. Tell us some of the issues these seasonal workers face nowadays in Australia.
Yeah, for people to understand that the 2 programs are the Seasonal Workers Program and the Pacific Labour Scheme. I'm sure people are aware that workers are coming in from 9 countries in the Pacific and Timor-Leste to work in the agricultural sector in accommodation, that's within the Seasonal Worker Program. And in the Pacific Labour Scheme, they can work across all sectors. There's some differences in both programs, but I won't go into those differences. So the difficulties that I've come across with the workers, non-payment of salaries, we would call it stolen wages. We've seen in many media reports over the years where workers have not been paid their correct salary. On a visit to regional Victoria, I met a large group of workers from Timor-Leste, and in conversation with them, they showed me their pay slip, and I noticed that their piece rate for picking grapes was extremely low. So I said to them that this is not acceptable, and explained to them a little bit about what piece rate is all about, and encouraged them to make contact with the local government. They said that they knew someone from the Timor-Leste diaspora community in the local town nearby. So I kept regular contact with them, and eventually they had the courage to seek assistance from that person who helped them to get in contact with the government, and the government stepped in and their piece rate increased. So that's just one example. By making contact with the workers and educating them on their rights according to Australian laws, where once they're educated and empowered to act on their behalf, for them to act themselves, that's one good example as to how things have changed. Accommodation, the cost of accommodation and the quality of accommodation is another big problem for seasonal workers. And I'm the ACRATH's representative on the Australian Government Seasonal Worker Program Advisory Group. I've been the ACRATH's representative since January 2019, and we have quarterly teleconference calls. There are also representatives from government, from Approved Employers Association, and from other welfare stakeholders, such as the Salvation Army, Uniting Church, and to union groups. And we're there to offer advice to the government. It is an advisory group, and I have contributed in writing reports and giving feedback on the policies that have been upgraded over the last 2 years. I think another problem also is the area of cultural insensitivity. I've been invited to be a part of, I am a part of the government's evaluation of these two programs over the last couple of months, and we have submitted a report to the government suggesting some of the changes, and we have suggested that there be education to the approved employers and people involved in the programs around cultural sensitivity.
Thank you, Peter. I love also this week there was a great clip on SBS in Tasmania, and there were some people who were living in Tasmania. They were from Samoa, and they were singing a welcome to a group of Samoans who had been in quarantine, and they were now coming over to Victoria. But the songs that they were singing was a welcome and a thank you. So let's hope these people who are coming, particularly to Victoria, because I'm in Victoria, that their conditions are a lot better than some of the ones before, some of the advocacy work. And thanks for that.
I forgot to mention that Janine Bliss is on our call.
Yes.
So I'd like to thank Janine for all the wonderful work that she has done for many years with the seasonal workers. And Janine has been my mentor in this area, and I've gained a lot of knowledge from her.
Hello, Janine. Thank you. That's great. And I guess that it highlights too, people before us, like I'm only new as well. So people have been doing the long haul of advocacy and connecting with people who maybe are exploited or whatever, who need to speak up, I suppose, and we can be a voice for them in the advocacy action. Christine, your turn. So there've been some particular big wins. We like to call them big wins. Is there one you could share which explains the win, whatever that sounds like, and the steps, but then also sometimes with a win, there's more work needed, I guess.
Yep. And Cindy, you're right. Since we started up in 2006, there's been law changes, federal government law changes, state government regulation changes. There's been a whole lot of changes in visas. So there've been some really significant wins. I think probably one, and you're right, there's never a win and you just go, wow, that's done, tick, off you go. But one that was really significant, I think, was that it came about because some young women from a refuge workers came to our building because they were doing an in-service training, and they said, oh, we've got some women who are a bit like your trafficked women, but they're not trafficked. And we just talked a bit, and it became clear that they were trafficked, but they were that they'd come expecting a real marriage. One of the young women had a proper marriage ceremony in her home country and came to Australia, was put in a bungalow in the backyard of a house. The husband lived in the house with his live-in girlfriend, and the young woman was sexually assaulted. She was forced to work in the family business, and she had no agency. Your heart just went out to her because she was there in a Melbourne suburb with no agency, no English, and no ability to escape from this awful situation. So we took that story to Canberra, to the Office for Women, and the Office for Women said, oh, we don't know, this is not on our radar. So we contacted those workers from the refuge, and they said they had a refuge meeting of a network, and they said about 50% of the refuges had somebody like that woman in their refuge at that point of time. And so the Office for Women then started a whole process, and we weren't the only ones in the process. We never are the only one. We work in networks. But the network and the Office for Women kept working together, and a long story of, that was 2008, we took it to the Office for Women. On International Women's Day 2013, Prime Minister Julia Gillard announced a forced marriage law. So terrific outcome, and of course, we're not there yet. I feel like we're sitting in the back seat of a car saying, are we there yet? Well, we're not.
Christine or Peter, I guess the stories I've learned from you two and others who are very involved in this work, they're hard work. Like, they're really personal, really, really hard stories. How do you keep going, I guess?
For myself, that's the main focus of advocacy for me, is to keep the stories of the trafficked people, the abused workers, in my mind and in my heart, and to know that I'm not the centre of the advocacy. ACRATH isn't the centre of the advocacy. The abused workers, the trafficked peoples, are the centre of the advocacy. And I think it's always important for me to keep that in mind. And when I'm present with workers, or educating workers, or raising awareness for workers, advocating for their rights to be protected, that I see that the focus is for the workers. I'm also very aware that from my experience of advocacy, it's very important to be respectful of the workers if they would like their sharing to be stored, their story to be shared, and to get approval from the workers if they would like their story to be shared. Sometimes, in my experience, for exploited workers, they're willing to come forward and share their own stories to the government and to be empowered by that. But they need to make that free choice themselves.
Wow. Thanks, Peter. That's so listening to you, it reminds me. Yeah. Christine, your thoughts. What keeps you going?
Can I dive in on what Peter just said as well, Cindy?
Of course.
Because Peter and I were working with some exploited overseas workers, and all the indicators were there that the people had been trafficked. And we needed some authority from them, and they sent us their a passport photo, their passport page photograph, and Peter went through and checked them, and Peter does the most thorough checking of every item. But Peter said to me, he turned each page and gave each person a blessing as he checked their details, and I thought, that is such a motivator to see those people's photographs, because we'd never met them, we'd seen lists of names, but that was a beautiful moment for me to say, yeah, they're our partners in this. And I think the other part for me is also that, something you alluded to before, that we are successful. I mean, I was before this stuff, this campaigning, I was involved in the Free East Timor campaign, and many times I thought, oh, I can't do this, but sorry about that. But the Timorese in the mountains said, you can't give up. There's no sort of, oh, we'll do it for 10 years and then it's long enough. You just do it until you do it, until you're successful. And so I think I loved it when you called this conversation about being in it for the long haul. But along that long haul, we are successful.
Thank you. I'm noticing some hands up, and I'm noticing chat room. We will engage with those chats and hands up later, like as in after we've closed, we can send you a message or get back to you. Unfortunately, this style of conversation is a conversation because we want these two people to represent ACRATH, but also to share their skill set and their passion. So I'm sorry, but that's what we've planned to do. So thank you. So Peter, this actually beautifully leads us into the next question, and that's about in August, it's our Canberra advocacy work, not that it's, I guess it's not only August, it's the whole time. But in August this year, we'll be sitting there on a screen with politicians, policymakers, department heads. I mean, you know these people. As we close our Zoom, what do you hope people leave as they walk out of their Zoom office and they head off? What do you hope they take with them from our time advocating for, how you beautifully described it, these individual people, these people who keep your work focused?
Over the last several years, one of the advocacy points we have brought to Canberra is for the Australian government to implement a national labour hire licensing scheme that covers all industries across Australia. This was brought up with the government's Migrant Task Force report in March 2019, and the government, in principle, has supported the 22 recommendations coming from this report. And one of those recommendations is to implement a national labour licensing scheme. I need a license to drive a car here in Australia, but I don't need, there is no national license if I want to employ seasonal workers from the Pacific. And ACRATH has raised that one example to politicians at Canberra. And we will be advocating strongly with our networking partners to make sure that this new policy is implemented. And the reason for that is that it gives, it then becomes a law, and then the government can monitor the implementation of the law. If there's no law, then how can the government implement something and monitor something? So it's very important that this becomes national law in Australia. Yeah. It is state law in Victoria and Queensland, and it's been state law in those two states for a couple of years, and they have a very robust law to protect the human rights of all workers working in all sectors within these two states. And we are hoping that the government will make this a national law.
Wow.
So that would be what my take.
Yeah. Okay, so let's hope someone's listening. That's good. So Peter, when you say that, like ACRATH is like, it's big on one level, but it's small on another. And you've often mentioned our networks, our partners. Can you explain the importance of our network and partners? What does that bring for you, or bring for our workers, the workers that we're sort of advocating for?
It's important to advocate together with our partners, because we go with a stronger voice, and also to we do different kind of work when it comes to advocacy. Okay. And Australia is a huge country, and within the area of seasonal workers, I'm able to visit seasonal workers in regional Victoria. Janine is able to visit seasonal workers in regional Queensland, but I don't have the capacity to travel around the whole of Australia. Yeah. But our networking partners do have people working in the other states and are hearing the stories of the seasonal workers. So it brings more strength and it's a more robust advocacy when we go to talk with government. And also our networking partners, just as ACRATH is well respected by the government, our networking partners are also well respected. And I feel that our voices are listened to, and on both sides of government, they can say, oh yes, we see the problem and we know the problem needs to be fixed by implementing a new law. Wow. The difficulty is within the legal process, sometimes it takes a long time for these laws to be passed in Parliament, but we're there for the long haul.
Yeah, that's right, back to that long haul. Thank you, Peter. So Christine, as we head into, and we've only got a couple of minutes left, I'm conscious of time, and we will finish up at 12, but that's an awful way to ask the next question. That's terrible. But the same sort of question, like, what do you hope someone, when they close their computer, they head out, and it could be the policymaker, whatever. What do you hope they take away? What have they heard from the team that's chatting to them about advocacy, or, you know, the steps we want things to change?
Thanks, Cindy. I think our team and also our network that we're working with really want another thing apart from what Peter said, and I agree totally with Peter's point, that that we want to leave them with them committed to the idea that a person trafficked into Australia should access their human rights and a chance to heal, not because they're prepared to talk to the police, but because they've been wronged in Australia. And we've got a whole lot of people from St Vincent's Health here. I want that person who is recognised in St Vincent's Health Emergency Department as showing indicators of trafficking, that person will access their rights without having to call in a police presence into the emergency department, but will be able to have an additional pathway. We asked for that to the UN in 2006. We're still asking for it, and we'll keep asking until we get it.
Wow, what an amazing commitment. And I'm seeing flashes of chats about different things that people would probably love to spend time, which indicates that the topic's been engaging. So Peter, thank you. And Christine, thank you. And not just the topic, but the passion, everything that goes behind that. And I suppose it's also saying maybe we could do something like this again into our future, into our conversation series. So thanks for your time. And I know it's not just this 25 minutes, it's actually been a lot of time thinking about what's going on. So Marg, I don't know where you are, but Marg, I'll ask you to come in now. But thanks, I was very privileged to be part of the conversation.
Thanks, Cindy. Thanks,
Thanks,
Peter.
Cindy, for leading us.
Thank you, Cindy. Goodness, what a powerful 25 minutes conversation reflecting on why we're here and also where we're going. And that term long haul, that's going to sit with me for quite some time. So thank you very much. On behalf of everyone who's attended here today, can I thank both Christine and Peter for their frank conversation, their frank sharing about the work that they've been engaged in advocating for change. And can I thank Cindy for keeping the conversation really alive and vibrant. Cindy, thank you. Can I ask, before we finish, can I ask you all to consider one thing that you can take from today's session? As Peter said, perhaps you could hold it close to your heart and follow where it leads you. And I urge you, quite sincerely, if you can support ACRATH in some way. July marks the end of our formal fundraising period, so you might be able to offer some financial support through a donation or the information is on the screen now there right in front of you. But you might also consider some other form of support. You might even become a member, you might read our newsletter, you might continue to pray for us. You're certainly invited to tell anyone you know about what you've learnt today. So before we go, our next session in this conversation series will be on the last Wednesday of August. So it will be on August the 25th. And the topic will be ACRATH, how far have we come? It will be very informative. And I thank you very much for today. Goodbye.